Hello my friends and sunflowers, welcome to my channel. My name is Lena. So it's been a while. To be honest, we're in between comebacks right now, so it's kind of hard to come up with consistent content, but thank you all for hanging around. I do have some larger videos planned, and by larger I mean it took more work to do, which is why it's taking a long time, not necessarily that it's gonna be like an hour long. Just to clarify. But I've been thinking a lot about time, I've been reading a lot about time, and I realized no one else really cares about this, but I posted a tweet on Twitter a while back about how I thought time worked, and then I kept thinking about it, and I've just been researching it, and it's been so fun, and I wanted to share kind of what I discovered about time and how the Big Hit universe is like using time and time travel in their stories, and why it's not the same for each group, and why this affects the story for those groups as well. So I'm really excited for today's video. Let's go into it. What is time? This is actually a lot harder of a question to answer than it first seems, because I think on an intuitive level people understand like what time is, but the moment you try to explain time in words, it's like, so we understand the passage of time intuitively, but it's kind of like numbers where there's not like a physical concept. Like the number 3, you know, I can conceptualize it, and I can know that 1, 2, 3 fingers is that. Same as with time. I can conceptualize time by being like, oh, where's my phone? Being like, wow, it's 10 a.m. on, you know, this particular day. It's understood as a concept, you know, as a relative movement to us around the sun and the changes that happen per seasons and stuff like that. But time itself, what is that? It's a huge philosophical question, and we're not going to go too deep into it. However, for the sake of this video, I'm going to assume that time is an actual thing that exists, and we can travel through it, because that's how time travel works. First of all, you have to understand that there's a couple different ways that time and time travel can be like used in fiction. The first is a single timeline. So anything that is will have already happened. Think of it like Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban in that film. They go back in time, but they find out they had already done that like previously, but it could not have happened another way. That's a good example of like one singular timeline. Some stories, such as Back to the Future, kind of deal with like rewrites of time. So when you change things, the future also changes. Of course, then you are introduced to things like paradoxes, like if you went back and killed your grandfather, then you wouldn't have existed in the future, technically speaking. It's called the grandfather paradox. Anyways, basically you run into problems, and I don't think Big Hit is using this particular type of thing, mainly because of the paradox situation. The other third popular way of addressing this problem is, of course, having multiple universes, or like multiple timelines in certain situations, which I will in this case consider as multiple universes for each timeline. The idea of the multiverse is essentially that like everything that could possibly happen, even like the most minute change, exists like that in another universe somewhere, some parallel universe. So that kind of implies that there's an infinite amount of universes. And within the context of Big Hit, like when I'm talking about the Big Hit universe, I'm talking about the story, but within the encompassment of this story of Big Hit, it is actually a multiverse that exists. So Big Hit subscribes to the multiverse theory to a degree. There's a lot of evidence of this, but this doesn't mean that every single story actually works within a multiverse, which once again I'll talk about. And then in some media, there's actually the idea of like an alpha timeline or a true timeline where things are happening the way that they're supposed to happen. Think of this as like a video game where you get like the true ending of a video game, or you can get like a bad ending, or like, oh, this is a good ending, but this isn't how it was meant to happen. Big Hit also uses this idea of like an alpha or a true timeline. And in the case with some video games, and of course the idea of Jin, you have to kind of go through the bad timelines first before you can even really reach the true timeline. For example, with Jin, he wants to stop Namjoon from getting arrested, save him because he's getting arrested. But he needs that additional knowledge from several of his failed attempts, or his like, I don't know, dead timelines, I guess, in order to actually help him. He'll find a way to stop like the fight that happens that inevitably leads to him getting arrested. A true timeline kind of thing does kind of make you think of the idea of fate and that you were fated to do something, but I don't think that's necessarily the point, especially with BTS. It's more about like acceptance and memories and friendship. It's more about him finding the map of the soul and having the confidence to move forward with his actions than anything else. But if, you know, the idea of fate is comforting to you, then you can definitely look at it that way. And if you prefer to think of it as, like, the people involved have chosen this, then that's also okay. Anyways, now that we know a little bit about how time works, we can look at how Big Hit is using this knowledge in their stories, and how, like, some of it makes them absolutely genius. And yeah, I was actually wrong about TXT, so... The groups that I'm going to be talking about today are BTS, GFRIEND, TXT, and ENHYPEN. I do actually think that New West might be part of the storyline, especially since they're New Year's Eve live. However, I'm not going to be covering them today because I still have a little bit to learn about them. But if you are interested, I think that it's more focused on memories than it is time travel. Like, a lot of their focus seems to be on like memories almost of past lives, although I'm not 100% sure, don't quote me on that. Just what I've understood from the music videos. Anyways, now that that's out of the way, let's get started. BTS and GFRIEND. Okay, I'm putting these two together because I think that they have a really similar way of addressing time. Firstly, they seem to follow the like main alpha timeline situation, as I mentioned with Jin, but GFRIEND does it as well. Basically, they're going to create all these little offshoot universes every time that they're doing something, and then they come back to that original point. Every single time they fail, it creates an offshoot universe, which either, I'm not sure if they disappear or the timeline is dead, but we generally don't follow those timelines past the point where they go back in time. However, the way that they go back is a little bit different. For Jin, it seems like he's almost not in complete control. He hears glass shattering and then he goes back in time. He does seem to be able to do this an unlimited amount of times though. However, because of this, his memories and like perceptions of time become kind of distorted, like they lose their meaning. So when you're going through time, it's because things are changing around you that you're able to figure out that time is passing, if that makes sense, you know? Like 10 years ago, you know that you looked like a child, and by referencing the fact that you no longer look like a child, you can assume that time has passed. However, because Jin keeps going back and 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 back, after a certain amount of failures, he's just like, oh, I'm here again. It's like he has no meaning, he's devoid of emotion. This is something that's kind of weaved into the feeling of the notes. He knows what to do, obviously, but it's not until his friends like start helping him and he starts actually actively finding the map of the soul that he is able to kind of regain that sense of emotion, and that's when the timeline actually starts to progress a little bit further. In GFRIEND's case, Una, and apparently everyone else, as we've recently discovered, actually has a limit on the amount of times that she can go back. It's shown that Unha only has 6 butterflies that she can use to reverse time, and then after she uses all the butterflies, then the siren will take over and she kind of becomes a witch. So it's considered to have negative consequences when you've used it, and so there's only 6 times. It's not that many, but in both cases it does take them like back to the beginning. And from a story point of view, Jin and Unha respectively, the people going back in time, are the only ones that remember that other timeline, like the other universes that were created because they failed. This is especially obvious with BTS and a lot less obvious with GFRIEND, mainly because in GFRIEND's case, like, it's implied that all the other girls were also going back in time, so I'm not sure like how it overlapped, but at some point all of them used all of their butterflies and it was in the same timeline and they all turned into witches. They probably have a lot of dead ends, and like a really messy timeline to kind of end up at the point where they are by like Mago, by that last like comeback that they had. Moving on to TXT. So TXT, on the other hand, actually operates a little bit differently. Instead of multiple timelines and universes, they are actually operating on a single timeline, and I've actually gotten this wrong in the past. I've previously separated TXT's timeline into the main timeline and then the alternate timeline in order to explain several of the music videos, but I actually think that was wrong. I think that they're reversing time on one timeline only, which explains the lack of cracking glass, which I'll get to when I talk about ENHYPEN. All of these things that they've experienced are happening on one timeline. So a normal person's timeline looks like this, and it's just going through a time like that. However, with TXT, they go here and then they stop and then they go back. But their timeline, their personal timeline, which does go like this in terms of their understanding, starts to fold back on each other. So it folds back, every single time that they're reversing time. And this is what creates the appearance of alternate timelines from an observant point of view. But it's actually all happening at the same point in time, which is why the fire is there. They also all remember all these reversals because they're going back in time together. The main reason that I believe that this is all one timeline is actually because of relativity. In Jin's case, every time he went back in time, he would actually take himself from this point in time and go back here. However, TXT are seen actually just reversing time, like literally rewinding it. It's like if you remember VCRs, you know how you just rewind the tape? I feel old talking about VCRs. If you take a VCR and you rewind it at the point in the movie, it's still the same, like, tape. It's the same movie. You're just watching it again. But because you're watching it again, you're creating new memories, even though you remember watching it the first time. It's like that. And the lyrics of Runaway heavily imply that they're rewinding time together. However, it's the lack of awareness that their actions are causing, which is what causes, like I said, the fire. At one point early on in their timelines, probably, they created a fire, and then now every single time that they reach that point in time, the fire is always going to happen. So say that this is space-time, this t-shirt. You have time, which is the t-shirt itself, and space, which is the graphic on top of it. So every time, you know, you go through here, it's always going to look the same no matter how you look at it. However, if you were to poke a hole in the shirt, which I'm not going to do, but if you were to poke a hole through the shirt, every single time you came through here, no matter how many times you did it, there will always be a hole in that shirt. That is the fire in relation to the TXT universe. The graphic itself will stay in place, even as time itself moves around. I'm so sorry. But yeah, that's why every single time that they come back to that point in time, there's a fire. Even if they don't cause it, there just has to be a fire in relation to them because they've already done it. So how come TXT have to operate on the same time-space continuum, but BTS and GFRIEND don't? Like, how come they're allowed to create different timelines with each mistake? Well, like I said, with Jin's part, it has to do with the breaking of the glass, which I think is probably him breaking through the, like, confines of that timeline to go back and create his own new timeline. He's literally like breaking through reality or space. With GFRIEND, they don't have this sound effect. However, I do think that the like magic aspect of the butterflies is what allows them to do that. And keep in mind, theirs is a lot more limited, and it wasn't gifted to them by the cat. TXT, however, it seems like they're using their own innate magic, and they don't actually know what they're doing. It's kind of implied that they know that the kind of time magic is forbidden because of the lyrics of Runaway. However, they're not leaving their universe. It's always going to be the same universe, the same timeline. How does this affect the death of Yeonjun? Well, actually, the death of Yeonjun hasn't happened yet. Every single time we've seen it, it's been implied as being a future event, but in the actual timeline story, it hasn't happened yet. But no matter what happens, no matter what chaos and turmoil they go through, it's kind of implied he's gonna die either way, which makes me wonder if it's another hole in the t-shirt, which would be an unfortunately fatalistic viewpoint. Like, can you really change that? After all, a component of the TXT universe is magic, so it's possible that the idea of time itself can be broken, or that they can end up going in and creating like another timeline or another universe where Yeonjun doesn't die, etc., etc. We'll have to wait and see. Speaking of new universes and timelines, let's talk about ENHYPEN. First, I just wanted to say, ENHYPEN's a pretty like new group, so the amount of information that we have on them is really small. We literally only have 2 music videos and or a couple more if you count the like intros and outros and stuff like that, and 1 album to go off of. That's not very much, at least in the scope of like their universes. They've hinted at a lot of things, but they haven't given a lot of solid answers, so a lot of this might change in the future. So that's just my disclaimer. This is not hard fact. Might change. If you're interested in their story and for some reason I leave you incredibly confused with this video, I did make a long, cozy video about the ENHYPEN storyline, which you can watch here. In ENHYPEN's case, space and time are tightly woven together, kind of like this t-shirt. This t-shirt. Like TXT, it's important to understand that it's very tightly intertwined, and it's kind of one and the same. This is important to understand because ENHYPEN seems to be trying to find a place that exists outside of time itself. In a letter shown during their Mama performance, it said, "Life and death mix, up and down flip, a grand carnival where order has overthrown time." It's hard to kind of think about what overthrowing time actually means, but if we think about it as something that exists outside of time itself, it would signify something unchanging because time signifies change, right? To go through time means that you see things change. So if there's no time, then it would be unchanging. This matches with their vampire theme really well. Likewise, the physical act of overthrowing time, this is possible that it could mean that they could appear at any point in time, at any time that they want. Why can I not say things in a way that makes sense? I honestly think this is what's happening in the music videos. They're literally going through space and time, and especially in the Let Me In music video, they're breaking through the walls, essentially breaking through reality. And there's a lot of window cracking, which, as I mentioned with Jin, seems to be a way to break through that particular reality. And for him, he just returns earlier in the timeline. But for ENHYPEN, who knows? I can easily look at this and say, yes, this is how it works from the limited amount of information that we have right now. The idea of life and death mixing, so that overthrowing time has no effect on you, whether you're dead or alive. That could explain the Jungwon scene in Given Taken, and then the vampire werewolf thing, that kind of feels like an eternity, which I said could be why it's outside of time itself, time doesn't affect you. And then there's the whole thing with them aspiring to godhood, which would also affect this, so that's kind of why I assumed this at the current time. But like I said, things might change. There's just so much development that needs to happen before I can confidently tell you, yes, this is happening. They are traveling through space and time over the course of several different universes, but I'm not sure. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video. There are more videos coming that I have planned. I just have been really wanting to make sure that I take my time with these because there's a lot of information for me to go over and double check. The TXT reading list will be coming very soon. I am almost all caught up on the books that I have to read for it because I wanted to give you guys some good suggestions. So for those people who asked for that, thank you very much. If you liked this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on notifications so that you're notified every single time that I post a new video. All of my social media is linked down in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay sunny, my friends. Bye! By the way, the theory of time that I talked about in this video is actually just a very simplified theory. We know very little about time in general, both in reality and, of course, in the fictional Big Hit universe. And while we can technically measure time with calendars and clocks, it's debated on the actual existence of it, or if it's simply a person's interpretation of the world around us, basically. It's a human invention. However, in order for time travel to work, especially going backwards in time, I had to assume that time does, in fact, actually exist in this storyline. I can't picture it any other way. Anyways, I just wanted to put this here as a disclaimer because I simplified the idea and concept of time space a lot in this video to make it easier, hopefully, to understand, since a lot of the debate surrounding it gets really specific and pedantic. It's crazy. Anyways, it was something I was reading about and I thought it would be a fun video to create, and that's how this came to be, but I'm definitely not an expert on the theory or philosophy of time. Anyways.